What would you do if three strangers cornered you in a restaurant thinking you were an easy target? Most people would panic, call for help, or try to escape. But Sarah Martinez wasn't most people. Behind her quiet exterior and gentle smile lay years of military training that had taught her one crucial lesson. Predators only understand one language, and she was about to speak it fluently. In just 15 seconds, three men learned why you should never judge a book by its cover. This is the true story of how one woman's past came rushing back to save her future, and why sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody sees coming. Sarah Martinez sat alone in the corner booth of Romano's Italian restaurant, her fingers tracing the rim of her wine glass as she watched the rain streak down the window. The soft jazz music and warm lighting created the perfect atmosphere for what should have been a romantic dinner with her fiancé David. Instead, she found herself checking her phone for the third time in 10 minutes, his text message still glowing on the screen. Emergency at the hospital. Surgery running late. So sorry, babe. Rain check? At 32, Sarah had grown accustomed to David's unpredictable schedule as a cardiac surgeon, but tonight felt different. Tonight marked exactly 5 years since she had left the Navy SEALs, trading her combat boots for civilian shoes and her rifle for a marketing executive's briefcase. She had wanted to celebrate this milestone with the man she loved, to share stories about how far she had come from the woman who once repelled from helicopters and neutralized threats in the dead of night. The restaurant buzzed with the typical Friday evening crowd. Business executives loosened their ties after long workdays, couples shared intimate conversations over candlelit tables, and families celebrated various occasions with loud laughter and clinking glasses. Sarah had specifically chosen this upscale establishment because of its reputation for discretion and class. The mahogany walls were lined with vintage Italian photographs, and the smell of fresh basil and garlic wafted from the kitchen, creating an ambiance that usually made her feel at peace. She had dressed carefully for the occasion, wearing a simple black dress that David had bought her for their anniversary, along with the pearl earrings her grandmother had given her before she passed away. Her long dark hair fell in gentle waves past her shoulders, and she wore just enough makeup to highlight her natural beauty. To any observer, Sarah appeared to be exactly what she had worked hard to become, a successful professional woman enjoying a quiet evening out. But appearances, as Sarah knew better than most, could be deceiving. The transformation from Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, Naval Special Warfare Operator, to Sarah Martinez, Marketing Executive, hadn't happened overnight. It had taken 2 years of intensive therapy, career counseling, and deliberate practice to learn how to exist in a world where the greatest threat to her daily survival was missing a client presentation or getting stuck in traffic. She had trained herself to smile instead of assess, to trust instead of suspect, and to relax instead of remain constantly vigilant. Most days, she succeeded. Most days, she could sit in a restaurant without automatically cataloging exit routes or identifying potential weapons among the dinner utensils. Most days, she could laugh at David's jokes without listening for footsteps approaching from behind or scanning the room for suspicious behavior. Most days, she was just Sarah the marketing executive, not Sarah the warrior. Tonight was not most days. The three men had been watching her for 20 minutes, though they probably thought they were being subtle about it. They sat at the bar, taking turns glancing in her direction while nursing their drinks and speaking in voices just low enough that she couldn't make out their words. Sarah had noticed them the moment they walked in, not because of any specific threat they posed, but because old habits died hard, and situational awareness was a skill that never truly left you. The first man was tall and broad-shouldered, probably in his mid-30s, with short blonde hair and the kind of artificial tan that came from too many hours at expensive tanning salons. He wore an expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the fact that his fitness came from a gym rather than actual physical labor. His watch caught the light every time he gestured a flashy Rolex that he seemed to want everyone to notice. The second man was shorter but stockier, with dark hair slicked back with too much gel and a gold chain that disappeared beneath his unbuttoned collar. He had the look of someone who thought expensive cologne could mask poor hygiene, and his constant fidgeting suggested either nervous energy or chemical enhancement. His eyes darted around the room frequently, but they always returned to Sarah's table. The third man concerned her the most, not because he was the most obviously threatening, but because he was trying so hard not to appear threatening at all. Medium height and build, wearing khakis and a polo shirt that looked like they came from a department store catalog. He had the kind of forgettable face that would blend into any crowd, but his stillness was unnatural. While his companions gestured and moved constantly, He remained motionless except for his eyes, which tracked every person who entered or left the restaurant with the precision of someone conducting surveillance. Sarah had encountered enough predators during her military service to recognize the signs. They were hunting, and she was their prey. She considered her options while pretending to read the dessert menu. She could leave immediately, making some excuse about feeling unwell or remembering a prior commitment. She could call David and ask him to send someone to pick her up. She could even approach the restaurant manager and express concerns about the men at the bar, though without any overt threatening behavior, that conversation would be awkward at best. Instead, she decided to finish her meal and see what developed. Part of her choice was practical. She had already ordered and paid for an expensive dinner, and leaving would mean wasting food and money. But another part of her choice was emotional, rooted in a stubbornness that had served her well during her military career. She had every right to be here, enjoying her dinner in peace, and she wasn't about to let 3 strangers intimidate her into leaving. Sarah ordered the tiramisu and another glass of wine. Settling in to wait and watch, she used the mirror behind the bar to monitor the 3 men without obviously staring at them, and she noticed that their conversation had taken on a more animated quality. The stocky one kept gesturing in her direction, while the tall one appeared to be arguing against whatever plan they were developing. The quiet one simply listened, occasionally nodding or shaking his head. The restaurant began to empty as the evening progressed. The family celebration at the large round table finished their meal and left in a flurry of children's laughter and parents' gentle corrections. The business executives settled their tabs and headed home to their suburbs. The romantic couples gradually departed, holding hands and making plans for the rest of their evening. By 9:30, only a handful of tables remained occupied, and Sarah began to understand why the 3 men had been waiting. In a crowded restaurant, approaching a lone woman would have attracted attention and potential intervention. In a nearly empty restaurant, witnesses were scarce and escape routes were clear. She watched them stand up from the bar, the tall one throwing money on the counter while the stocky one straightened his jacket. The quiet one simply stood and waited, his hands hanging loose at his sides in a way that suggested familiarity with violence. They didn't look in her direction as they prepared to move, but Sarah could feel the shift in energy, the way the air seemed to thicken when violence was about to unfold. The waiter approached her table with the check. A young man, probably still in college, who had been attentive throughout the evening without being intrusive. He had the kind of genuine smile that reminded Sarah why she fought so hard to protect innocent people, why she had spent years of her life in dangerous places so that others could live safely in beautiful ones. "Did you enjoy everything this evening, miss?" he asked, setting the leather folder beside her wine glass. "Everything was perfect," Sarah replied, and meant it. The food had been excellent, the service impeccable, and the atmosphere exactly what she had hoped for. It wasn't the restaurant's fault that predators had decided to hunt here tonight. She signed the credit card receipt and added a generous tip, knowing that in a few minutes this young man might witness something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. She hoped he would be smart enough to stay back and call for help rather than trying to intervene. But she couldn't control what others chose to do. She could only control her own actions and reactions. The 3 men began walking toward her table, just as she finished signing the receipt. Sarah set down her pen and picked up her wine glass, taking a small sip while calculating distances and angles. From the bar to her table was approximately 20 feet, with 4 empty tables and 2 occupied ones between her position and theirs. The nearest occupied table held an elderly couple sharing dessert and speaking in whispered Italian, completely absorbed in their own conversation. The other occupied table seated 2 women in their 20s, already deep into their second bottle of wine and unlikely to notice anything short of an explosion. The bathroom was 15 feet to her left, down a narrow hallway that would provide concealment but also potential entrapment. The kitchen entrance was 30 feet straight ahead, probably locked from the dining room side and filled with staff who wouldn't expect trouble. The main entrance was 40 feet to her right, past the hostess station and through heavy wooden doors that led to the parking lot. Her purse sat on the bench beside her, within easy reach. Inside were her car keys, cell phone, pepper spray, and a tactical pen that most people would mistake for an expensive writing instrument. She wasn't carrying her sidearm. 5 years of civilian life had taught her that feeling safe didn't require being armed, though tonight she was beginning to question that philosophy. The tall man reached her table first, sliding into the booth across from her without invitation. His expensive suit couldn't hide the aggressive energy radiating from his body, and his artificial smile never reached his eyes. The stocky one took position at the end of the table, blocking her exit from the booth, while the quiet one remained standing, his back to the restaurant and his eyes fixed on Sarah. "Good evening, beautiful," the tall man said, his voice carrying the kind of confident aggression that suggested he was used to getting what he wanted through intimidation.
You've been sitting here all alone, and we couldn't help but notice.
Seems like a shame for a woman like you to be dining by herself. Sarah set down her wine glass and met his gaze steadily. I'm actually enjoying the solitude, thank you. I was just leaving. The stocky man at the end of the table laughed, a sound that held no humor. Now that's not very friendly. We're just trying to be sociable. Maybe buy you a drink, get to know you better. I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested. Sarah's voice remained calm and polite, though every muscle in her body was beginning to coil for action. Please excuse me. She started to slide toward the end of the booth, but the stocky man shifted to block her path more completely. The movement was subtle enough that casual observers wouldn't recognize it as restraint, but Sarah understood its meaning perfectly. They weren't taking no for an answer. The tall man leaned forward, invading her personal space in a way that was clearly intended to intimidate. Come on, sweetheart. Don't be like that. We're nice guys, just looking for some company. You must be lonely, sitting here by yourself on a Friday night. Sarah could smell his cologne, mixed with alcohol and something else, something sharp and chemical that suggested pharmaceutical enhancement. His pupils were slightly dilated, and his movements had the loose quality that came with liquid courage and artificial confidence. I'm asking you politely to leave me alone, Sarah said, her voice still level but carrying an edge of warning that made the quiet man shift his stance slightly. I'm not interested in company. The stocky man reached across the table and grabbed her wrist, his fingers closing around her skin with practiced force. Hey now, no need to be rude. We're just being friendly. Maybe you're not used to real men paying attention to you. Sarah looked down at his hand on her wrist, then back up to his face. Something in her expression made him hesitate, though he didn't release his grip. Let go of my wrist, she said quietly. The quiet man spoke for the first time, his voice barely above a whisper. Maybe we should just go, guys. She's not interested. The tall man ignored his companion, leaning even closer to Sarah. Look, princess, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. We're going to have a drink together, maybe take a little ride, and you're going to be very nice to us. Or we can make things difficult for you. Your choice. Sarah felt the familiar shift in her consciousness, the way her breathing slowed and her vision sharpened when violence became inevitable. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in 5 years, but it returned as naturally as riding a bicycle. Time seemed to slow down, and she became acutely aware of every detail around her. The weight of the wine glass in her left hand, the angle of the stocky man's grip on her right wrist, the position of the quiet man's feet, the exact distance to each potential weapon within reach. I see, she said softly, and smiled. It wasn't the gentle, professional smile she had cultivated over 5 years of civilian life. It was the smile of someone who had spent years learning how to hurt people efficiently and permanently. Someone who had hoped those skills would never be needed again, but who had never forgotten how to use them. The 3 men didn't recognize the smile for what it was. They saw a frightened woman trying to appease her attackers, and they relaxed slightly, thinking they had won. They had 15 seconds to realize how wrong they were. The transformation happened in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Sarah's left hand, still holding the wine glass, moved in a smooth arc that ended with the base of the glass connecting with the tall man's temple. The sound was crisp and final, like a branch snapping in winter wind. Red wine mixed with blood as he slumped forward, unconscious before his forehead hit the table. Simultaneously, her right hand twisted inside the stocky man's grip, using a joint manipulation technique that reversed their positions in less than 2 seconds. What had been his controlling grasp became her weapon as she applied pressure to nerve points that dropped him to his knees beside the table, his face contorting in shock and pain. The quiet man, despite his earlier reluctance, reached inside his jacket with the kind of smooth motion that suggested professional training. Sarah saw the movement in her peripheral vision and reacted without conscious thought. She released the stocky man and pivoted, her right elbow driving backward into his solar plexus, while her left hand intercepted the quiet man's reaching arm. The tactical pen from her purse appeared in her hand as if by magic, its pointed tip coming to rest against the quiet man's carotid artery, with just enough pressure to draw a single drop of blood. He froze completely, his weapon only halfway clear of its shoulder holster, his eyes wide with the sudden understanding that he was 1 heartbeat away from death. 15 seconds. 3 attackers neutralized. The elderly Italian couple was still discussing their dessert in whispered tones, completely oblivious to the violence that had erupted 20 feet away. The two young women at the corner table were taking selfies with their wine glasses, laughing at some private joke. The waiter was in the kitchen, probably dealing with closing duties. In the sudden silence that followed the brief explosion of violence, Sarah could hear her own heartbeat, steady and slow, and the labored breathing of the three men who had so catastrophically misjudged their target. The stocky man was still on his knees, clutching his chest and trying to breathe through the pain of her elbow strike. The tall man remained unconscious, blood seeping from the gash on his temple where the wine glass had connected. The quiet man stood perfectly still, afraid to move, with the tactical pen positioned at his throat. Sarah spoke without raising her voice, her tone conversational and calm. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to very slowly reach into your jacket with your left hand and remove your weapon using only your thumb and index finger. You're going to place it on the table, then step back 3 feet and put your hands where I can see them." The quiet man's eyes darted toward his unconscious companion, then to the stocky one who was beginning to recover his breath, then back to Sarah's face. Whatever he saw there convinced him that compliance was his only option for survival. "Easy," he whispered, moving with the careful precision of someone who understood that any sudden motion could be his last. "Easy now. I'm just reaching for the gun." He extracted a compact pistol from his shoulder holster, holding it exactly as she had instructed, and placed it carefully on the table before stepping back. His hands rose slowly, palms open and visible. Sarah picked up the weapon without taking the tactical pen away from his throat, checking the chamber and safety with practiced efficiency. It was a Glock 26, well-maintained and recently cleaned with a full magazine. She ejected the clip and the chambered round, then disassembled the weapon with movements so fast and precise that the quiet man blinked in surprise.
"Military," he said, not a question, but a statement of recognition.
"Navy," Sarah replied, scattering the gun parts across the table.
"Special warfare. You?" "Army. 3 tours in Afghanistan. Look, this wasn't supposed to go like this. They said you were just some corporate executive, easy target." The stocky man had managed to get back to his feet, though he was still hunched over and breathing hard. He looked at the scattered gun parts, then at his unconscious companion, then at Sarah with an expression of dawning horror. "You're military," he gasped. "They didn't say anything about you being military." "They?" Sarah asked, keeping the tactical pen in position while her mind raced through the implications. Who exactly is they? The quiet man, who she was beginning to realize might be the only one of the three with any actual training, closed his eyes and shook his head. This is so fucked. This is so completely fucked. Sarah heard footsteps approaching from the kitchen and glanced quickly to see the young waiter returning to the dining room. He stopped short when he saw the scene at her table, his face cycling through confusion, fear, and uncertainty in rapid succession. "Call 911, Sarah told him, without taking her attention away from the two conscious attackers. "Tell them there's been an assault at Romano's and that the situation is under control, but they need to send officers immediately." The waiter fumbled for his phone, his hand shaking as he tried to unlock the screen. The elderly couple finally looked up from their dessert, the woman gasping when she saw the blood on the table, and the man slumped forward in the booth. "Oh my God," the woman said in accented English. "What happened?" "Please stay back," Sarah said gently but firmly. "Everything is under control, but please keep your distance until the police arrive." The two young women at the corner table were just now beginning to notice the commotion, their wine-flushed faces sobering as they took in the scene. One of them started to stand, but her companion grabbed her arm and pulled her back down. Sarah returned her attention to the stocky man, who was still trying to process what had just happened to him. "You said they told you I was an easy target. Who hired you to come after me?" He looked at the quiet man, seeking guidance, but got only a subtle shake of the head in response. The tall man was beginning to stir, groaning softly as consciousness returned, along with what was probably a significant concussion. "I don't know what you're talking about," the stocky man said, though his voice lacked conviction. "We were just trying to be friendly. You're the one who attacked us." Sarah almost smiled at the absurdity of the statement. "You grabbed my wrist, threatened me, and your friend there was reaching for a concealed weapon. In most jurisdictions, that constitutes assault, attempted kidnapping, and possession of an unlicensed firearm. Your definition of friendly is interesting." The quiet man, who was clearly the most experienced and dangerous of the three, spoke carefully. "Look, I don't know your name and I don't know your story, But I know when I'm outclassed. Whatever this is about, whatever someone paid us to do, it's not worth dying for. There's someone paid you, Sarah repeated, filing that information away. How much? 5,000 each, he replied, ignoring the stocky man's sharp intake of breath. 15 grand total to grab you and deliver you to a warehouse in Queens. No permanent harm, they said, just a conversation. The pieces began falling into place in Sarah's mind. This wasn't a random attack by opportunistic predators. This was a coordinated operation, planned and financed by someone who knew enough about her to identify her location, but not enough to realize what they were dealing with. What kind of conversation? She asked. They didn't say. We were just supposed to deliver you and collect our money. Professional transaction, nothing personal. The tall man finally managed to sit up, one hand pressed to the gash on his temple while he blinked away confusion and tried to focus on Sarah's face. When recognition dawned, his expression shifted from confusion to fear. Jesus Christ, he whispered. What are you? I'm someone who just wanted to have a quiet dinner, Sarah replied, pressing the tactical pen a little more firmly against the quiet man's throat as sirens began wailing in the distance. Someone who retired from a very specific line of work and hoped to never use those skills again. The police arrived in force, 6 officers led by a sergeant who took one look at the scene and immediately began separating witnesses and securing evidence. Sarah identified herself and explained that she had been attacked by 3 men, one of whom was armed, and that she had defended herself using minimal necessary force. The sergeant, a 20-year veteran named Rodriguez, who had seen his share of violence, examined the disassembled Glock and the unconscious attacker with professional interest. Minimal necessary force? He asked, raising an eyebrow. They're all alive and functional, Sarah replied. In my previous line of work, that qualified as minimal force. Rodriguez studied her for a long moment, taking in her civilian clothes and professional appearance, then looking again at the tactical precision with which she had neutralized 3 attackers. Previous line of work? Navy. Special warfare. I've been out for 5 years. SEALs, Rodriguez said. Not a question. He had served in the Marines before joining the police force, and he recognized the aftermath of professional violence when he saw it. These guys picked the wrong target. The paramedics arrived and began treating the tall man's head injury while taking statements from the other 2 attackers. The stocky man claimed they had been trying to ask Sarah out, and that she had overreacted to their friendly approach. The quiet man remained silent, invoking his right to an attorney. The tall man, once he had been treated and was capable of coherent speech, provided a different story. Still groggy from the concussion and probably not thinking clearly, he admitted that they had been paid to grab Sarah and take her to a specific location in Queens. He couldn't remember who had hired them or how the contact had been made, but he was able to provide the address of the warehouse where they had been supposed to deliver her. Sarah listened to his statement with growing concern. Someone knew where she was, knew her routine well enough to predict that she would be dining alone at Romano's on this particular evening. Someone had enough resources to hire professional muscle and rent a warehouse for whatever interrogation or confrontation they had planned. Most troubling of all, someone had access to information about her past, but had somehow failed to realize that she was a highly trained former special operations soldier. That suggested either incomplete intelligence gathering or deliberately withholding information from the hired muscle. Detective Janet Morrison arrived an hour later, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who specialized in organized crime and had dealt with similar contracted violence before. She interviewed Sarah separately from the other witnesses, taking detailed notes about every aspect of the evening. You said you chose this restaurant specifically, Morrison noted. Had you been here before? Several times over the past 2 years, Sarah replied. My fiancé and I come here for special occasions. Always on Friday nights? Usually. David works at Metropolitan General, and Friday is typically his lightest surgery day, so we often make dinner plans for Friday evenings. Morrison made another note. So, someone familiar with your routine would know to look for you here on a Friday night.
It would seem so.
The man with the gun, the one you called the quiet one, he had professional training. His record shows military service, 2 tours in Afghanistan, honorable discharge. After that, he worked private security for a few years before disappearing into the freelance market. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the restaurant's air conditioning. Freelance? Mercenary work. Kidnapping, intimidation, wet work for hire. He's been on our radar for 18 months, but we've never been able to connect him to anything specific. Tonight was the first time we've caught him in the act. Someone had not only identified Sarah and learned her routine, but had also hired professional talent to execute whatever plan they had in mind. This wasn't amateur hour. This was a sophisticated operation with serious backing. The warehouse address, Sarah said. Have you been able to check it out? We sent units there 2 hours ago. Completely empty, but recently used. Someone cleared it out fast, probably as soon as these 3 failed to check in. Professional level operational security. Sarah stared out the restaurant window at the police cars and ambulance lights flashing in the night. 5 years of peaceful civilian life had just ended in 15 seconds of violence, and she was beginning to understand that her past had finally caught up with her. "Detective Morrison," she said slowly, "I think I need to make some phone calls." The phone call Sarah made wasn't to her fiancé David, though he would be her second call. Instead, she dialed a number she hadn't used in 5 years. One that connected directly to a secure line at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California. "This is Commander Sarah Martinez, service number 2847, Alpha, November. I need to speak with Admiral Reeves immediately. Priority 1. The duty officer on the other end of the line didn't hesitate. Within 3 minutes, Sarah was connected to Admiral Patricia Reeves, her former commanding officer, and one of the few people alive who knew the complete details of Sarah's last mission before leaving the Navy. "Martinez." The Admiral's voice was crisp and alert despite the late hour. "I heard you were out, living the civilian dream in New York, last I checked. Admiral, my cover may have been blown. 3 contractors just tried to grab me at a restaurant in Manhattan. One had serious training, and they were hired to deliver me to a warehouse in Queens for what they called a conversation." The silence on the other end of the line lasted exactly 10 seconds, which in Admiral Reeves's world meant that she was rapidly processing information and considering multiple response scenarios. "Are you secure now?" she asked finally. "I'm with NYPD at the scene. The immediate threat is neutralized, but whoever hired them cleared out their staging area as soon as the contractors failed to check in. Professional level operational security. Copy that. Give me 20 minutes to make some calls, then get somewhere secure and stay there. I'll have answers for you within 6 hours. Admiral, what was the classification level on Operation Blackwater?" Another pause, shorter this time. "You know I can't discuss that over an open line, Martinez. But I can tell you that certain files have very long expiration dates, and some people hold grudges for even longer." Operation Blackwater had been her final mission before retirement, a deep cover infiltration of an international arms trafficking network that had taken 18 months to execute and had resulted in the arrest or elimination of more than 30 high-value targets across 6 countries. The operation had been classified at levels that most people didn't even know existed, and the few survivors of the criminal network had disappeared into holes so deep that even Navy intelligence had lost track of them.
How long do I have?
Sarah asked. "Unknown. But, Martinez, listen to me carefully. You remember what you were before you became a marketing executive. If someone's coming for you because of Blackwater, they're not interested in talking. They're interested in revenge, and they've had 5 years to plan it." The line went dead, leaving Sarah standing in the parking lot of Romano's restaurant with the weight of her past settling on her shoulders like a familiar but unwelcome coat. She had spent 5 years trying to forget the woman she had been, the things she had done in the service of her country, the enemies she had made along the way. Now it seemed that her enemies had not forgotten her. Detective Morrison appeared at her elbow, having finished interviewing the other witnesses. "Bad news?" "Complicated news," Sarah replied, slipping her phone back into her purse. "Detective, I may not have been completely forthcoming about my background. The attack tonight might not be random, and it might not be over." Morrison studied Sarah's face in the flashing lights of the police cars. "What aren't you telling me?" "I need to make another phone call first. Then I'll need to speak with someone in your federal liaison office. This might be bigger than a simple assault case." Her second call was to David, who had just finished his emergency surgery and was preparing to leave the hospital when his phone rang. Sarah could hear the exhaustion in his voice when he answered, followed immediately by alarm when she told him where she was and what had happened. "I'm coming to get you right now," he said, and she could hear him moving quickly through the hospital corridors. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine. But David, I need you to listen carefully. When you leave the hospital, take a different route home than usual. Park 2 blocks away from your apartment and approach on foot. If anything looks unusual, anything at all, don't go in. Call me immediately." "Sarah, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "Someone tried to kidnap me tonight. Professional contractors, hired muscle. I don't think it was random, and I don't think it's over. We need to be very careful until I can figure out who's behind this and what they want." The silence on David's end of the line lasted long enough that Sarah began to worry they had been disconnected. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and controlled. "This is about your time in the Navy, isn't it? The missions you can't talk about. Yes. How bad is it? Sarah looked around the parking lot, noting the positions of the police officers, the location of the streetlights, the angles of approach that someone could use to mount an attack. Even after 5 years of civilian life, the tactical assessment was automatic and immediate. I don't know yet. But David, if something happens to me, if I disappear, or if you can't reach me, there's a safety deposit box at First National Bank on 42nd Street. Box number 1127. The key is taped under the bottom drawer of my desk at home. Inside the box are documents, phone numbers, instructions. Follow them exactly. Sarah, stop talking like that. Nothing's going to happen to you. I hope you're right, but if I'm wrong, if the people who sent those men tonight decide to escalate, you need to be prepared. Promise me you'll be careful. David promised, though she could hear the fear in his voice. They had been together for 3 years, engaged for 1, and she had never told him the complete truth about her military service. He knew she had been a SEAL, knew she had served in classified operations overseas, but he didn't know about the people she had killed, or the network she had destroyed. He didn't know that somewhere in the world, powerful people had very good reasons to want her dead. The FBI arrived at the restaurant 45 minutes after Sarah's call to Admiral Reeves. Special Agent Marcus Webb was a 20-year veteran of the Bureau's Organized Crime Task Force, and his presence indicated that someone at a very high level had made a phone call. Webb took custody of the scene from Detective Morrison with the kind of smooth efficiency that suggested federal override protocols. Martinez, Webb said, approaching her with the careful respect that federal agents reserve for former special operations personnel. I understand you've had an eventful evening. I assume someone briefed you on the situation? Partially. Why don't you walk me through the events from your perspective? And then we can discuss what you know about who might want to have that conversation with you in a Queens warehouse. Sarah recounted the evening's events in precise detail, from the moment she noticed the 3 men watching her, to the point where the quiet one admitted they had been hired to deliver her to a specific location. Webb took notes sparingly, asking occasional clarifying questions that demonstrated a solid understanding of tactical operations and professional kidnapping techniques. The contractor with military training, Webb said when she finished. Marcus Thompson, formerly Sergeant Thompson, Army Rangers. He's been on our watch list for some time, but tonight is the first time we've been able to connect him to anything actionable. His arrest might give us leverage to trace back to whoever hired him. Has he talked? Not yet. But we have his phone, his financial records, and a warrant to search his apartment. If there's a trail leading back to his employer, we'll find it. Webb closed his notebook and looked directly at Sarah. Now, about your background. Your service record is mostly classified, but I've been read into enough to understand that you made some very dangerous enemies during your time in the Navy. Do you have any specific reason to believe that tonight's attack was related to one of your previous operations? Sarah told him about Operation Blackwater, providing as much detail as she could without violating classification protocols. Webb's expression grew increasingly grim as she described the scope of the arms trafficking network she had helped dismantle, and the high-profile arrests that had resulted from her intelligence gathering. How many of the network leaders are still alive and unaccounted for? Webb asked. As of my retirement 5 years ago, at least a dozen principals had escaped arrest and disappeared. They had resources, connections, and very good reasons to hold grudges. And now, someone's found you. It appears so. Webb stood up and walked to the window of the restaurant's back office, where they had moved to continue their conversation in private. The parking lot was still full of law enforcement vehicles, but the scene was winding down as evidence was collected and witnesses were released. Miss Martinez, I'm going to be blunt with you. If this is connected to Blackwater, you're not safe anywhere that can be predicted or easily accessed. Your home, your workplace, anywhere you have a regular routine. These people have had 5 years to plan, and they've just demonstrated that they have current intelligence on your movements and the resources to hire professional talent. Sarah had reached the same conclusion, but hearing it stated so directly made the situation feel more real and more dangerous. What do you recommend? Short term, we can provide protective detail while we investigate the connection and try to identify the specific threat. Long term, you may need to consider relocating under a new identity, depending on what we find. The thought of running, of abandoning the life she had built over the past 5 years, filled Sarah with a cold fury that she hadn't felt since her active duty days. She had served her country with honor, had risked her life repeatedly to protect innocent people and stop dangerous criminals. The idea that those same criminals could now force her to abandon her home, her career, her relationship with David, was unacceptable.
Agent Webb, she said quietly, I appreciate the offer of protection, but I have a counter-proposal.
I'm listening. Instead of waiting for them to come after me again, why don't we let them find me? Use me as bait to draw them out, then take them down permanently.
Absolutely not.
The Bureau doesn't use civilians as bait, especially not in operations targeting international criminal organizations.
I'm not a civilian, Sarah replied.
I'm a former special operations soldier who just proved she can handle herself against professional contractors. I know these people, I know how they think, and I know how to hurt them. Webb was already shaking his head. Even if I wanted to authorize something like that, which I don't, it would require approval levels that go all the way to Washington. And frankly, Ms. Martinez, you've been out of the game for 5 years. These aren't the same people you fought before. No, Sarah agreed. They're 5 years older, 5 years more complacent, and they've spent 5 years believing they got away with something. They've made one crucial mistake. They found me, but they don't really know me. They think I'm just some marketing executive who got lucky in a restaurant fight. Before Webb could respond, his phone rang. He listened for several minutes, asking occasional questions and making notes. When he hung up, his expression was troubled. That was the team searching the warehouse. They found something. What kind of something? Evidence that whoever hired Thompson's team has been planning this for a long time. Photos of you, copies of your daily routine, blueprints of your apartment building, your workplace, even the hospital where your fiancé works. They've been watching you for months, possibly longer. Sarah felt the familiar shift in her consciousness that came when a mission transitioned from planning to execution. The peaceful marketing executive who had been enjoying wine and dinner 2 hours ago was gone, replaced by Lieutenant Martinez, the woman who had spent 8 years learning how to hunt dangerous people in dangerous places. Agent Webb, she said, her voice taking on the clipped precision of a briefing officer. I'm going to ask you one more time to consider using me as an asset in this operation. I can give you access to these people that no other approach will provide. I can draw them out, identify them, and help you take them down. Webb studied her face for a long moment, probably seeing the same transformation that had made 3 experienced contractors freeze in place less than 3 hours earlier. I'll make some calls, he said finally. But Martinez, if we do this, it goes by the book. Federal rules, federal oversight, federal backup. You don't go cowboy, you don't freelance, and you don't take personal revenge. This is about justice, not payback. Understood. And if at any point I determine that the risk to you or to civilians is too high, we shut it down immediately. Agreed. Webb left to make his phone calls, leaving Sarah alone in the restaurant's back office with her thoughts and her memories. Through the window she could see David's car pulling into the parking lot, and she felt a pang of guilt about the danger she was about to bring into his life. But she also felt something else, something she hadn't experienced in 5 years of safe, predictable civilian existence. She felt the thrill of the hunt, the clarity of purpose that came with a mission worth fighting for. Someone had made a serious mistake by threatening her and the people she loved. It was time to remind them why she had been one of the Navy's most effective special operations soldiers. It was time to show them that retirement didn't mean defeat, and that some skills never faded no matter how long they went unused. As David walked through the restaurant's front door, his face tight with worry and relief, Sarah made herself a promise. This would end with her standing over the people who had threatened her new life, and they would understand in their final moments that they had chosen the wrong target. The hunt was about to begin, and Sarah Martinez was ready to be the hunter again.